The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Venezuela continues to devolve into total and utter chaos. Arrests have now been made in Venezuela after soldiers tried to launch an uprising against President Nicolas Maduro. There was actually an attack launched against a military barracks in Valencia, Venezuela, and 2 attackers were killed, at least 8 people arrested, according to President Maduro himself. There was a video released on social media which showed uniformed men saying that they were rising against what they described as a murderous tyranny. And this is all in the context of months of protests in Venezuela. The ruling Socialist Party's deputy leader called the attempted uprising a terrorist attack on Twitter. And there has been tons of blowback, not only to what's going on in Venezuela, but also even to my commentary recently from some who describe themselves as being on the left, defending Nicolas Maduro and Hugo Chavez and criticizing me. And it's been very disturbing in the wake of this totally undemocratic process by which this election was triggered in Venezuela, an election whose details I will get into in a moment. I've received all sorts of messages from people saying, David, you're an anti-Maduro shill because you're Jewish. You're an anti-Venezuelan shill because you're Argentinian, and Argentinians hate South America. The Argentinians I meet seem to dislike the United States quite a bit. It's not South America that they dislike, but I guess that's anecdotal in both cases. David, you have your view about Venezuela because Venezuela is more brown, Argentina is more white, and you're part of that upper middle class Argentinian whatever that doesn't like brown people, which is laughable. The reason my family moved to the United States in 1989 is because we had no money in Argentina, because things were going so poorly in Argentina. I wonder if we had been part of the upper middle class in Argentina, I probably never would have come to the US, and you'd never be even writing me a message right now because I wouldn't have this program. And the way that the argumentation usually goes is, hey, listen, there was an election in Venezuela and Maduro supporters came out and they won the legislative elections. And of course, the reality is the elections were boycotted by the opposition because the elections were widely seen as fraudulent and invalid and completely rigged. So then the defenders, the apologists of the Maduro regime will say, well, if those opposition individuals had voted, then they might have won. Well, no. Number one, that doesn't appear to have been the case. Number two, there have been all sorts of bogus charges brought against opposition leaders to begin with. And lastly, there was never a vote about whether to have this legislative election. An actual democracy, which is not what Venezuela is, would say, hey, let's have a referendum. Referendum is not the right term, but let's have an initial vote to see whether we are going to have this legislative election. Instead, you have an election where no opposition candidates participated. The assembly has the power to rewrite the Constitution and could override the opposition-controlled National Assembly. And the key point for me is whatever criticism you have of American imperialism and the U.S. interest in oil in Venezuela, or whatever criticism, valid, of course, you have of ways in which the United States has meddled in other Latin American countries, whatever criticisms you have, Venezuela is not a democratic country, period. And it is wrong to support the Maduro regime, full stop. The government of Nicolas Maduro is not a legitimate democratic government. The United States wants oil, so the opposition is all astroturf and bad. We're talking about a non-democratic government. Maduro's government has purged voter ballots. They've disqualified the candidacies of opposition leaders in elections on totally bogus charges. They've jailed opposition leaders on made-up charges with no due process. They censor media and prop up state media. People don't even know what's happening in their country. Some people don't know. I want to be clear, qualify that with some. These are just a few of the things that the Maduro Chavez governments have done. It should be painfully obvious to anybody who is an objective observer, but sadly, there are people on the left who love it. I've seen the most vile defenses from the left of Nicolas Maduro over the last 10 days, and it's truly disgusting. It's going to be interesting. I'm going to be in Argentina next week with my family. My family is all left wing, but you've got the left that seems to sort of like the nonsense that's going on there. And then you've got the left that is critical of what is just authoritarianism under the guise of democratic socialism, which it's really not. And it really makes me sad when the left misses the forest for the trees. And that is exactly what is going on here. Late last week, we saw arguably the biggest news so far in the Trump-Russia scandal investigation. We learned that Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller has impaneled a grand jury. You don't impanel a grand jury unless it's at least realistic that crimes were committed. And Trump continues to call the entire thing a hoax. I think he did that in West Virginia late last week when he was welcoming former Democratic West Virginia governor to the Republican Party, Jim Justice, switching from Democrat to Republican. Grand juries don't investigate hoaxes. I hate to break it to Donnie Boy. They don't investigate conspiracy theories. There are very specific rules for when and how a grand jury can be used. And there are right-wing commentators that are saying, oh, Mueller is going on a fishing expedition just to see what a grand jury might uncover. Wrong. Grand juries cannot be used that way. A grand jury is put in place because Mueller's investigation has reached the point of having evidence that points to criminal conduct. That doesn't mean criminal conduct 100% took place. It doesn't mean that it would be 100% prosecutable, but it means there is evidence that exists that points to crimes. That doesn't mean, Pat, that indictments will necessarily happen, but this is not a fishing expedition. This is the logical progress of a very serious investigation.
No, it just seems like every bit of news that's come out of this investigation or the Russia probe overall has been heading in one direction.
Yes.
I mean, whether it's the Jared Kushner back channel, whether it's James Comey being fired or the Don Jr. meeting. And then you get to the point where Robert Mueller is appointed as a special counsel. He is going to be looking into having a grand jury. I mean, this is all going in one place.
And the other thing I want to mention is, even though it made major headlines that there is a grand jury looking into whether the president of the United States illegally colluded with a foreign nation to obtain the Oval Office to win the presidency, it's major news. At the same time, it's not that surprising because once you put in a special prosecutor, you're already doing that because of what the circumstances point to. So even though it's major news that there's a grand jury of historic proportions, it's not altogether surprising. And Ryan Lizza in The New Yorker wrote that in the Clinton email case, a grand jury was impaneled to issue some subpoenas. We've recently learned that, but it never led to indictment. So there's no guarantee that a grand jury is going to lead to indictments, but the fact that we had a grand jury in the first place already told us that there's nothing here.
It is pretty telling, especially if you look at the fact that there's a second grand jury looking into Michael Flynn over in Eastern Virginia.
That's right.
Based on his connections to a Turkish businessman. So is that one not going anywhere either?
Oh, I guess we'll have to wait and see. And this could all go on for months or years. And Newt Gingrich is now saying the location of the grand jury is a problem. It's a D.C. grand jury, and Washington, D.C. votes very Democratic. And Newt Gingrich tweeted a couple of days ago when it leaked, or when it was announced, rather, or revealed that there was a grand jury. Newt Gingrich tweeted, President Trump got 68% of the vote in West Virginia and 4.8% in Washington, D.C. Guess where Mueller has a grand jury? Guess how biased it will be. Sadly for Newt, you don't get to choose where you are investigated. Donald Trump is president of the United States. His possible crimes are looked at by our national intelligence and law enforcement agencies, and that's in Washington, D.C. But remember, Bill Clinton was impeached. Democratic Bill Clinton was impeached in liberal-leaning Washington, D.C. And there's one other element of this. Trump has previously talked about his red line on Robert Mueller's investigation, saying if Mueller starts looking into the Trump business dealings, that might cross some kind of a red line for Trump. We've now heard from Assistant Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who has confirmed what we all knew, which is that a special counsel can investigate any crimes they uncover in the Russia probe period. If they go in because of Trump-Russia collusion and what they find is obstruction of justice related to the cover-up, that is fair game. However, if it goes further and what they find is international money laundering or domestic tax fraud, as I'll talk to you about later in the show, It's all fair game, Pat. And even though Trump talks about this red line, even the assistant attorney general says Mueller has wide discretion here.
Especially if you look at the precedent that the Republicans set in the 90s, where a Whitewater investigation into Bill Clinton ended on a stained dress from Monica Lewinsky.
Exactly right. And there are many differences between the current investigation and what Ken Starr was doing under Clinton's time. But the point is there is very, very wide range that is provided to these special prosecutors. Lastly, it looked like Trump was sort of cucked on Twitter. I mean, I don't want to use such an inappropriate term.
It's got to be used.
It's got to be used here. It seems that since new Chief of Staff John Kelly joined after the firing, and immediately affected the firing of Anthony Scaramucci, it seemed like Trump's tweeting was being kept under control. And maybe it's because he's on the 17-day golf vacation. We don't know. We were not really hearing from Trump on Twitter, but then this morning he exploded again on Twitter. And it was after Senator Dick Blumenthal said something about Trump-Russia collusion, and Trump just couldn't resist starting to talk about Vietnam and all sorts of other stuff related to Blumenthal. And again, on CNN, on MSNBC this morning, the talk was once again returning to Donald Trump's Twitter. So if it was Kelly that was keeping Trump under control, cucking him in terms of his access to social media, it seems to have ended. Trump's back on Twitter.
Maybe he can control him for like a week or so, but it's like a pressure cooker. I mean, at some point, the thing's going to explode.
Last thing I want to say on this, and you kind of alluded to this, Pat, earlier. We've continued to see the Trump-Russia collusion story move forward, despite hearing from countless people that there's no story, everything is all fake, it's a witch hunt, it's going to go away. We only see forward progress. We only learn more. We see more and more aspects of the Trump-Russia blackmail dossier confirmed. I can't think of one moment so far, Pat, where we've had to say, oh, you know what? This big area of allegations regarding Trump-Russia, it was all wrong. Let's back up. We've gone too far. That's never happened. The progress has been faster at some moments and slower at other moments. But it all keeps moving forward. And that's what is so stunning to me when I hear from both the left and right that there's no story here. If there isn't, why do we learn more and more every week and we get closer and closer to proving that there was collusion, which we now have some evidence of in writing?
I mean, people who deny this may point to the fact that Trump attacked a Syrian airbase, but of course, he let the Russians know before they did that.
Yeah.
And also, you know, the sanctions that have now been levied on Russia, he couldn't really get out of that situation. I mean, Congress passed that so overwhelmingly.
Those are the 2 points people point to. They say, listen, if Trump is so in bed with Russia, why did he bomb that Syrian airbase? Of course, he warned Russia about it, and that airbase was back up and running within hours. And number 2, well, Trump signed off on new sanctions against Russia, yet Trump really had no choice. He could have done nothing and they would have been enacted anyway. He could have vetoed them, which would have been completely jumping the shark at this point and proving that he is completely a puppet of Vladimir Putin. He really had no choice. And if those are the only 2 things you can point to, there's like 10 things on the other side that Trump has done that are exactly what Vladimir Putin would want. Send me your thoughts. Am I missing something? Am I just clueless about this entire thing because I'm some kind of shill? I know you'll tweet me about that. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Emilio Castillo. Emilio, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. We are viewer and listener supported media. And I do invite you to support the work we do by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. Many of you have now been with us for 7, 8 months, 9, 10 months, I guess, since the actual November election. And I would invite you now to also support the work we do through membership. If you want a major membership discount, this Friday, August 12th, we're going to be doing an email blast with a big league coupon code. If you want to be notified about that, just sign up for our newsletter at davidpakman.com. And also, we are now taking applications, Pat, for fall internships. Our summer internship phase will be wrapping up soon, and we will be taking applicants for the fall internship here in our Boston studio, okay? So if that's something you're interested in, you can get college credit. Some of our interns do. You don't have to get college credit. You can get in touch, send your resume and a cover letter through our website, davidpakman.com. Click on Contact Us. Okay, earlier in the program, I alluded to Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, seemingly focusing on possible financial crimes, hiring experts in international money laundering, et cetera, in his investigation of the Trump-Russia scandal. And that would explain a lot about Donald Trump's reluctance to release his tax returns. If that is the area where Trump is most liable or at risk, then it would make sense that he would not want his tax returns being public. The details of a particular Donald Trump real estate deal have now gone public, and they look a whole hell of a lot like criminal tax fraud. We don't have his tax returns, but we do have the documents for one particular transaction, and it relates to a pre-election sale of property from a company controlled by Donald Trump to a company controlled by his son, Eric Trump. Okay, so here's the way it went. April of 2016. There's a company managed by Donald Trump, which sold 2 condos to a company managed by Eric Trump. Each condo sold for $350,000. Now, so far, you might hear that if you live in many parts of the United States and say, okay, why is that even remotely alarming? The median home price in the United States a couple of years ago was around $200,000. $350,000 condo, slightly more expensive than the average property, no big deal. The problem is this was New York City. Not only that, it was Manhattan. Not only that, it was Central Park Avenue South. Not only that, it was a full-service doorman building on the 13th and 14th floors of an apartment on Central Park Avenue South.
Sounds like it will be a little bit more expensive then.
$350,000 is not a price that makes sense. The condos there sell for a lot more. In fact, 2 years before Trump sold these 2 condos to his son, a similar apartment, 5G, Trump's apartments were 13 and 14G. Usually the same letter is the same floor plan, right? These are apartments vertically stacked above each other, sold for nearly $700,000. 2 months before this sale to Eric Trump, the same units were advertised for around $800,000 each. So there's this little thing called the law. Very important thing. People tell me, but they don't always know, because my dad was in real estate. He was small loan of $1 million because I make great deals. There's this thing called the law, where if a parent and child do a real estate sale for fair market value, you don't pay any gift tax. If a parent sells their kid real estate at a discounted price, then that is a partially taxable gift. The seller must pay a gift tax of up to 40%. In this case, that gift tax would have run Trump about $350,000. Each taxpayer gets a $5.49 million lifetime exemption, meaning you can give away that much money without incurring the tax. And to claim that a transaction is covered by that exemption, you have to file a gift tax return. So, of course, we don't have Trump's tax returns, but we do have the New York City property tax records. Great. And those show that Trump paid $13,000 in state and local transfer taxes for 2 sales. That happens to be the amount that would be paid when you have a real estate sale between 2 strangers. But if he paid state and local transfer taxes, that means these transfers of real estate were not treated as gifts. And on the real estate tax forms that were filed in New York, Trump didn't check any of the boxes indicating that these were sales between relatives or of less than the entire property value. These transactions were treated as if they were fair market sales to a stranger, meaning it's almost certain that Trump didn't file a federal gift tax return. And willful failure to file such a tax return is a misdemeanor, and there is also a possible evasion of taxes charge here, which is a felony.
You know, these charges do seem pretty damaging, but of course Trump can just exonerate himself if he decides to release his tax returns. You know, of course we're joking, but this guy's been doing shady business deals for years, and I don't think the public would have known about it had he decided not to run for president.
That's why I keep saying
Russian mobsters and all this crazy stuff.
That's why I keep saying this has got to be the worst possible thing for Trump's business and his personal finances, having run for president. And I know he's already making money off of the presidency, filtering money through Secret Service into his hotels and all sorts of other stuff. But the scrutiny that he's under, and it really is damning in terms of our system, that the Trumps are so brazen in these types of actions and they face zero consequences. And this is where you hear this fallacious argument that liberals hate the rich. Liberals don't hate the rich. They hate that there's a different standard when it comes to criminality for the rich and for other people and for what individuals who are really wealthy are able to get away with. That's the problem that liberals have. It's not hating the rich.
And now it's even legally ambiguous as to if Donald Trump can be prosecuted for any of this
criminally,
stuff.
yeah.
Obviously, that wouldn't happen to begin with. I guess he could have a civil case against him because that precedent was set back with the Paula Jones scandal and Bill Clinton.
But of course, tax
he's
evasion.
not going to face any charges for this.
Tax evasion would be criminal, and of course, it doesn't appear as though a sitting president can be charged criminally. Let's talk about vacations. Generally, we hear about Trump's taking a lot of vacation. He's playing golf a lot. Last week, I told you that Donald Trump was starting a 17-day golf vacation at one of his clubs. And Donald Trump and the White House have been going to great lengths to portray him as working really hard during this vacation at Bedminster, New Jersey Golf Club. For example, Donald Trump tweeted very astutely, given what it is that was ultimately revealed, working in Bedminster, New Jersey, as long-planned construction is being done at the White House. This is not a vacation, meetings and calls. On Saturday, an anonymous White House official briefer, an official did a briefing of reporters about these supposed working vacations and basically refused to admit that Donald Trump would be playing any golf, despite the fact that he's taking a 17-day vacation at one of his own golf clubs and he plays golf all the time. And this is just the best. Very shortly after that press briefing about how Trump isn't playing golf and is working hard, a video started circulating on Instagram of Donald Trump rolling up in a golf cart with golf clubs and saying hi to some people that were on the golf course. Take a look at this.
Not it, right? Let him come to you. Yeah. Everybody's been clear. Is my star doing a good job for you over here?
So on the one hand, this is the real world, folks. On the one hand, the more time Trump is playing golf, sort of like less time that he's doing horrible things. But on the other hand, we should have a president who will actually do some work. And from a completely objective point of view, in their first year in office, so far, Trump has taken 60 vacation days, right? This is through his first 6.5 months. In his entire first year, Obama took 27 vacation days. George W. Bush took 69. Bill Clinton took 21. George H.W. Bush took 40. Reagan took 42. And Carter took 19. Trump already 60 days through just his first 6.5 months. And this is what Trumpists don't get. It's not that he's playing golf that's the problem. It's that he lies about it. It's that he went after Obama endlessly about Obama's golf. And it's also that he's using taxpayer money to fund these trips. Every one of these trips is way more expensive than Obama's golf trips. Obama would play, I don't remember exactly, but like at DC area golf clubs, he would play at various government or military golf clubs, whatever. Trump is traveling to his own golf clubs to play all the time. He's going to spend in 1 year what Obama did in 8 years on vacations. And it's the funneling of the taxpayer money, and it's his supporters who claim to be fiscally conservative, yet they seem to have no problem with this.
And how absurd is it that the White House briefer here says that Trump wouldn't be playing golf during his vacation? I mean, we know the guy has logged 47 rounds of golf and it cost him $57 million already.
Yeah.
And he's at his own golf resort. Obviously, he's going to be playing golf.
I said this before. I used to try to play golf regularly, and I was too busy to play as much golf as Trump has played as president of the United States. And I was not president of the United States or anything nearly as demanding. It is very, very, very bizarre. And a lot of Trumpists don't care. They don't seem to understand hypocrisy in the same way that they don't seem to understand sarcasm. But that's probably a story for a different day. Leaks. The White House has been plagued with leaks. The real problem is that there are people in Trump's staff that are really worried about the country, so they're leaking. Fundamentally, that is the problem. And yes, Trump has no reputation for hiring good people, so maybe part of the problem is he doesn't have the best people working for him. But Kellyanne Conway is thinking about this as treat the symptom and not the disease. The advisor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, said that the Justice Department might consider using lie detectors on Trump's own staff to figure out who is doing the leaking. Here she is on Fox and Friends, certainly on Fox News, talking about it.
Call in every person and go ahead and run a lie detector on them. Why don't they do that?
Well, they may, and they may not. There are many different ways to discover who's leaking. The West Wing's a small place. Each of these agencies is relatively small. I think it's easier to figure out who's leaking than the leakers may realize. But on this matter, I want there to be bipartisan outrage.
This is just fascinating on multiple levels. One is that you would even consider subjecting your own staff to lie detector tests as a necessity to stop leaks. Second, lie detectors are incredibly inaccurate. If you trust a polygraph, you should check out the former police officer Doug Williams, who has talked about how dangerous polygraph tests are. They're very accurate in measuring sort of like general stress levels, but you can't really measure complex cognitive activity like lying through what's basically a stress measurement. Anyway, this is not a segment about lie detectors per se, but the reality is that statistically, realistically, there are probably many leakers because the number and the broad scope of the leaks suggest this is not a small problem. The recent transcript leaks, for example, it's very likely that those transcripts went through with the conversations with the Mexican and Australian leaders. They probably went through multiple channels before ultimately getting to the media, and it would be relatively tricky to find the leakers through lie detector tests. And another issue is, I don't understand why everyone in the administration is so worried about leaks, because Trump is causing a lot of his problems by his tweets and the things he says in national news interviews. Most of the Russia problem would not even exist were it not for the constant leaks and things that for the constant tweets and things Trump says during interviews.
And many times they'll just confirm whatever the leaks alleged of them, right? So it doesn't even really matter in the end because they don't try to contest it.
That's right.
And it's pretty telling too how, these White House staff members, they go into the job all MAGA, all like ready to go. They're, fully in support of the president and loyal to him.
It's going to be historic.
And then they get discouraged and realize that things aren't going so swimmingly. So they're turning on their own people.
The only good thing about that is that means there's at least some people working for Trump who are not so ideologically committed to the Trump agenda and the Trump cult of personality that they can't realize how bad it's getting. And then there's also the distraction element, right? Which is that they can never address the real issues. So instead, they attack the leaking. It could leak that Trump said, let's start killing puppies. I don't know. And you'd hear, leaks are bad. They're bad, folks. This is America. Snowden running around. Hillary wanted to give him a medal. Democrats are bad, folks. In Korea, they eat dogs. Obama was a sissy cat guy. He didn't even like dogs. He was all about cats. I've directed Jeff Sessions to investigate the leaks. We're talking about felonies here. No matter what leaks, they will focus on the fact that a leak took place.
Of course, the leaking in principle is what's bad, according to Donald Trump, when it's something against him. But when it's something against his opponents, like Hillary Clinton, then the content in the leaks matters.
Many discussions about this happening on our Reddit discussion forum. I invite you to visit us there at davidpakman.com/Reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're joined today by Jessica Pieklo, who is a senior legal analyst for Rewire, a daily online publication that covers reproductive justice. Jessica, in many of the discussions around the possible repeal and or replacement of the Affordable Care Act, there's not been a lot of discussion, at least in the mainstream, about the copays for contraception under the birth control provisions of the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of reproductive health related elements. So let's start there a little bit. I mean, what is at risk when we talk about the wholesale repeal of the Affordable Care Act when it comes to reproductive health?
Well, what's at risk if we talk about a wholesale repeal is nearly everything. Let's start with the birth control benefit, for example. What it did was create a fully functional, non-discriminatory coverage for the first time in the health insurance industry by allowing birth control to be considered preventative medicine, which it is. And as a result, it became part of essential health services, which are basically included in all packages. So that's one component of it. It means for the first time ever that people who need access to contraception for whatever reason can have it covered through their insurance by no additional cost or copay. So they're already paying that in their monthly deductibles. Then there's the potential Medicaid repeal. And we don't talk about that in terms of a reproductive justice issue, but I think it's really important to wrap that in because it's not necessarily tied to contraception specifically, but it is tied to the ability of people of low income and the disability community folks to gain access to comprehensive reproductive health care generally, and comprehensive health care also. And finally, there's one more provision in it called Section 1557, which requires that healthcare providers, including insurance companies, provide non-discriminatory health benefits across the board. And so this has largely protected the LGBTQ community from facing discriminatory care in, say, Catholic hospitals. So while we can talk about the birth control benefits, certainly as a huge component of it, I think it's important for people to remember that there are a lot of components to reproductive health that are built into the ACA.
When we talk about the cost of some of these services or products when not subsidized or covered by insurance, what are we talking about? I mean, I think there's a lot of people in our audience, some of whom may not know just based on being men and never having been on the purchasing side of some of these products, but also there may be people who have not availed themselves of these services recently. HHS Secretary Tom Price seems to believe that there isn't anybody who can't afford birth control without it being covered by insurance. But what types of costs are we talking about?
Well, I think when we hear comments like there's not a single person who can't afford birth control, what we're hearing is that men presume that all birth control is, say, for example, condoms, and something that you can pick up for $10 or so at your local Walgreens, presuming the pharmacist or the person at the point of sale doesn't turn you away because they have a religious objection to handing out contraception. So I think those comments are first and foremost grounded in an understanding that men use contraception and it's easy to use contraception. The reality is, obviously, women use contraception too, and it costs us significantly more money. Broadly speaking, if we were to talk about an IUD, which is one of the most effective forms of long-acting reproductive contraception, then we are talking about a minimum cost at about $800 out of pocket, sometimes more. And depending on the variety and ways in which the cost and the insurance program gets mucked up, that can go even higher. A package of birth control can cost some women under some plans as much as $75 a month. And that may not sound like a lot to somebody who makes $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. But if you're a wage worker, let's say you are someone who works at a hospital as a care attendant, and you are an hourly wage worker, or you make a low salary, $50 a month for a package of birth control pills is a lot of money. $800 at least for an IUD is even more and prohibitive.
Well, that's where you get to what I think is the sort of fundamental hypocrisy and double standard. And if anything has exposed the fact that many individuals don't care about double standards, it's sort of been the last 6 months of the current administration. But putting that aside for a moment, you have by and large the same political constituency that says that they are against abortion in all cases, or in almost all cases, wanting not to make birth control more affordable and more accessible, which has been shown in study after study to reduce the number of abortions because it reduces the number of pregnancies, which gets me, Jessica, ultimately believing that this is not really just about preventing abortion, because if it were, they would be making a lot of these birth control and contraceptives more available and more accessible. It's about people suffering the consequences for what the right considers to be immoral behavior. Isn't that really what underlies this inconsistency between, on the one hand, saying we want no abortions, and on the other hand, not wanting to do what has been shown to reduce the number of abortions?
Sure. I think that you hit on a very important point, which is that there is absolutely a moral hypocrisy. I would add to that that there is built within that moral hypocrisy a belief that women shouldn't even be working outside of the home, or that are valued enough to be worthy of non-discriminatory treatment. One of the things that we know for a fact is that the gendered wage gap is exacerbated by unintended pregnancies or even intended pregnancies that bring women in and out of the workforce. And so to the extent that women are unable to control their reproductive autonomy, to the extent that anybody is able to control their reproductive autonomy, what that does is also affect the way that they can earn a living and the kinds of earnings that they can make over the course of a lifetime. And so this is as much an economic attack on the poor as it is a moral attack from certain extreme portions of Christianity in this country.
Now it seems as though, at least temporarily, the Obamacare repeal has sort of stalled. Putting aside a repeal of the Affordable Care Act, we know about some of the other ways in which reproductive health can be attacked. And one is the cutting of funding at the state level to family planning clinics, as one example. What are other ways outside of the repeal of the Affordable Care Act that access to reproductive health benefits and contraception can be attacked?
Well, we've seen just swarm of these at the state level since 2010, whether they are architectural restrictions like the one struck down by the Supreme Court, or whether they are waiting periods that demand patients go visit a doctor and then wait 24, 48, or in some cases 72 hours before going back to another to the doctor to actually have the procedure. So that adds costs, it adds time and distance. I mean, if you've got to arrange for childcare, if you have to take time off from work. And then I think also we have to pay attention to the attacks on the front doors of the clinics, because they are rising. It's enough that we have patients navigate a myriad of legislative restrictions on abortion access, but then in many cases we force them and their companions to walk through throngs of protesters that are calling them terrible names, calling them sluts, calling them baby killers. And then sometimes these are, patients in need of a completed miscarriage, or terminating a pregnancy that was very much wanted, or, a pregnancy, a stillbirth. And yet at the same time, this matters not to the people who are protesting the clinics. They cannot see the difference.
Yeah, I've been covering that quite a bit. It's absolutely deplorable behavior. From a free speech and censorship perspective, how can you manage that? In other words, without infringing on one's right to be out in public and speaking or holding a sign that they want, at what point do we have to say, well, here's the gray area, here's where you're on one side of it, and here's where you're clearly on the other side of just free speech in public?
I think that's a really fair question. And I think, Rewire has released a short documentary called Care and Chaos that talks and explores this protest movement and the way it affects the front door of clinics. And in that film is focus on the only clinic in Fargo, North Dakota, and the law enforcement officer there. And I think that she does a really good job of balancing, as the film shows, the protest rights of those who oppose abortion and the rights of doctors and providers and patients and their companions to safely and securely access their constitutional right to an abortion. I think the other thing that's important to remember and gets lost in the speech context and was mentioned by Justice Stevens in one of his abortion-related decisions that for buffer zones that didn't quite get struck down, but that there is also the right to be left alone. And we've seen this in some of the cases involving, say, for example, the Westboro Baptist Church, where there are protest rights, but you also, as an individual, have a right to not be compelled to listen to speech that you don't want to. And I think that this is an issue that we need to revisit as we see an amplification of these protesters and them and their tactics getting, again, more radicalized and more direct. I don't think this is a thing that will go away. And so I think it is time to revisit and reinsert into the conversation the right to be left alone, because it exists in the Constitution. The First Amendment recognizes it, and it's an important component.
All very, very important issues spanning really a lot of different types of legal and cultural questions. We've been speaking with Jessica Pieklo, Senior Legal Analyst for Rewire, which is a daily online publication covering reproductive justice. Jessica, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Donald Trump and his staff and many right-wing media outlets have been aggressively bragging about the increase of the value of the stock market. Usually they point to the Dow, which is a price-weighted average of 30 companies. And it's often looked at as kind of an indicator of how the stock market at large is doing. Here, for example, is Trump bragging about the stock market recently on Twitter, where he said, quote, "Stock market could hit all-time high again. 22,000 today, was 18,000 only 6 months ago on election day. Mainstream media seldom mentions. Now, I've talked before about how I am in the market very, very broadly. I mostly just believe in investing in index funds at the lowest possible cost over the long term. So yeah, it's true. Stocks are up and they've been making money for investors for some months. The problem is the stock market, particularly the Dow, it's not really a good indication of how the economy is doing for the average American. Not every American owns stocks, and even among those Americans that do own stocks, the overwhelming majority of the shares are held by the really rich. Something that much more directly impacts the average American is the value of the American dollar, which Donald Trump hasn't been talked about, which has crashed over the last 6 months. Check out the dollar index, which we have on the screen right now. The dollar, as you can see by this image, starting back in January around Donald Trump's election, the dollar has been consistently falling as Donald Trump has done any number of questionable things, firing James Comey, threatening China around trade, whatever it is. This impacts people. The dollar's strength is relative to other currencies, and inflation tells us how it has changed in value relative to what things cost in the United States. So the exchange rate alone doesn't tell us that much. It's sort of a combination of the rate and the purchasing power of those dollars or the currency that you're changing dollars into. The consumer price index measures how much you can buy with the dollars that you have. A weak dollar can be a sign of an upcoming downturn in the economy. We've been talking about that, and that is absolutely a concern. A falling dollar can also signal upcoming inflation, for example. And when you have a strong dollar, Americans can buy more stuff, either when they travel or in terms of imported goods. Weak dollar makes the stuff we export cheaper so we can increase GDP, since foreign countries would conceivably buy more of our exports since they're cheaper in their currency. The problem is, though, that if the U.S. doesn't produce the type of cheap goods that will be bought more quickly with a weak dollar, which we don't, it doesn't really benefit us that much. And a weak dollar can lead to stagnant wages, which is and has been a problem in the United States. Travel becomes more expensive for Americans. And you know who does benefit from a weaker dollar? Stockholders of multinational companies. That's interesting. But Trump is silent, doesn't even mention the fact that the value of the dollar, Pat, has fallen off of a cliff since he's been president.
Oh, yeah. Trump loves to mention how he's created 1 million jobs since he took office, or how unemployment's at a 16-year low, and that the Dow Jones is at 22,000 now. But then, of course, he ignores the things that are negative indicators of the economy.
Not only that, he even is using evidence he believed to be doctored under Obama now to defend his economy. Like the same Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers that were fake under Obama are now the exact same numbers that he uses to justify his strength as some kind of steward of the economy.
Even just repeating the jobs numbers as they are now, or the unemployment numbers, it completely removes the context of the position that he inherited himself, taking over Obama's economy.
Completely ignores it. And we kind of have a good sense that Trump doesn't understand currency, because we know that he called disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn at 3 a.m. once to ask him whether a strong dollar or weak dollar were better. And of course, Michael Flynn was National Security Advisor, not exactly the first guy you think of when you've got questions about currency valuation. I want to follow up on a story from 2015, okay? The setup for this is I've given my view about the prosecution of former Nazis before, and I've been very clear that it doesn't matter how old they are, it doesn't matter how long it's been since the alleged crimes they committed during World War II. There is no statute of limitations on prosecution for Nazi war crimes, so you prosecute anybody you believe you have strong evidence against. And then, if they're convicted, you can consider the age or health situation of the person convicted in sentencing. This brings us to Oscar Groening, who is now 96 years old. We talked back in July of 2015 when Oscar Groening was charged and initially convicted. And he was convicted of being an accessory to the murder of 300,000 Jews and was prosecuted in Germany. He ultimately was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And he appealed that sentence on the basis that he is not fit for prison. That appeal has been rejected, and a doctor now says Groening is fit to go to prison assuming that the prison has appropriate medical care for him. And speaking when he was sentenced, Groening said, "No one should have taken part in Auschwitz. I know that. I sincerely regret not having lived up to this realization earlier, and more consistently, I am very sorry." But there's a lot more in terms of the specifics of this case, which is that he seemed to know and sort of relish all of the money as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz that he was handling. And of course, the counter is, well, yeah, he enjoyed getting and handling that money, but it was money that had already been appropriated by the Third Reich or whatever. We could kind of go back and forth all the time, right? But generally speaking, this is the process. Any of us could argue a particular person shouldn't be in prison. What the process is, if there's no statute of limitations that has expired, you prosecute. Once you have a verdict, if it's a guilty verdict, you sentence. And then in sentencing, you can consider age or health in sentencing. And a doctor has said, this man is fit. What do you think, Pat?
Well, I mean, the sad thing is, to begin with, that this guy won in a sense, that he was able to live his whole life as a free man. And, you know, maybe he was stressed out for a good amount of that time, knowing that he could possibly be caught one day, but only until he's in his 90s does he actually get caught. So that's where I think you have to start. And then you get to a point where the guy is facing only a 4-year prison sentence, which certainly doesn't add up to the crimes that he committed. It should be obviously the rest of his life, which 4 years may be at this point. But how different would his life be, you know, if he's in prison versus under house arrest? Because you'd have to imagine at 96 years old, I don't know how healthy he is. I don't know how active he is, but I'd imagine that his day-to-day life isn't going to be much different whether he's at his home or in prison.
My thought was that house arrest would be okay here, but I think you've struck on one of the most important arguments, which is by saying someone is too old to be sentenced, if they are found fit for prison, which Oscar Groening was, you're basically saying by virtue of having avoided justice for most of their lives, they now are going to be rewarded by not serving time in prison. This is someone who arguably should have been in prison their entire life for his role in the deaths of 300,000 Jews at Auschwitz. Why would we reward him because he has avoided punishment for the majority of his life? I fundamentally don't agree with that. But bottom line, when we look at the specifics of this individual 96-year-old man, I think house arrest would be okay.
And how do you get only 4 years for this? I mean,
I know.
Maybe they even...
I guess it's because he was the bookkeeper.
Yeah.
He wasn't, I don't know, doing worse things.
Still accessory to 300,000 deaths?
I know. So bottom line, I think that the process here was the exact right process. You prosecute, you convict, you sentence, and then you hear appeals for sentencing based on age. And a doctor was involved and made the determination. Send me your thoughts. What do you think is appropriate for Oscar Groening? We have a voicemail number 219-2-DAVID-P. Call anytime, even if it's 4 a.m. And many of you seem to like to call at 4 a.m. And that's great. That's okay. You can call 219-2-DAVID-P and leave us a voicemail number. We have 2 voicemails for you today. Let's go with the first one. Is this our Australian friend who loves the show?
Hey, David Packman Show. How's it going? I love your content. Please, just please keep putting your content up and making it. You're awesome. You are what awesome is.
Right.
Good
okay.
guy.
Very nice words.
I think it's safe to assume that he's Australian.
Well, his
we
country,
don't know for sure.
No, we have caller ID.
Okay.
And if he's not Australian, he is both spoofing an Australian number and accent. So I believe that this is an Australian individual.
I think we'll take him at his word.
Yeah,
then.
I believe so. And then one more quick little voicemail for you. This one really needs no introduction.
Can you smell what The Rock is cooking?
Interesting.
Yeah.
See, I would not think to call a show and in very calm delivery say, can you smell what The Rock is cooking?
Yeah, the delivery's not right, is it?
The delivery strikes me as it's being underplayed. But anyway, this is basically every morning for me. I listen to about 100 of these each day.
We should hire someone full-time just to go through the voicemail.
Just to review them, to give them a full, thorough review. On the bonus show today, a Democratic governor is no more. I don't mean he died. I mean he is now a Republican governor. We will also talk about a bizarre sea creature attack that left a 16-year-old's legs in rough shape. Let me put it that way. We will also tell you the results of a very, very exciting sausage survey in Canada, which sought to determine, are the meats listed on sausage packaging actually the meats contained in the sausages? Hint, very often they are not.
I hope we can go to the meat of the issue here.
We're going to get to the core of it. Yeah. Okay. Vegan meat jokes from producer Pat today. Great bonus show today. davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up, get instant access. Coupon code I voted 17 is available to you if you like.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.